You are here to learn the 7 steps to sensual tension. If that is not why you were here, you will learn them anyway, because they're hot. Laura, introduce yourself.
Hi, everybody. My name is Laura Kaye. I write primarily contemporary romance and romantic suspense. I have a couple of current series. I write Blasphemy, which is an erotic romance series of standalones. I just finished up the Hard Ink series, which is military romantic suspense. And I currently have the Raven Rider series, which is a bike club with a protective mission, which is also romantic suspense. And this is my new one that just came out 2 Tuesdays ago. So that's me. Thank you.
And they're all super hot.
Yes, everything I write is erotic, even if it's not specifically erotic romance. I tend to write at the hotter end of the spectrum. And you're not late. We just started a minute or two early. So thank you for
All
coming.
you missed was finding out who she is, so it'll be a surprise. See if you can figure it out from the book covers. I'm Christi Barth. I write contemporary romance. Not quite as hot as hers, but I try, because this is my goal, to make the words match the cover. And hello, welcome, plenty of chairs. And I'm going to start by, and you don't need to admit that you've ever watched a porn movie, not that there's anything wrong with it. Have you ever watched a sitcom where they make fun of a porn movie, and it's the guy ringing the doorbell going, "Pizza delivery," and the door opens, and then 2 seconds later they're having sex, yes, up against a wall with cheesy music. Does that sound familiar to everyone? We are here today to tell you how to not make your book sound like that. That is sex. We are here to talk to you about sensual tension. And the difference between sex and sensual tension is usually about 150 pages of a book. If you want to make your romance stretch out and have the characters come together instead of just coming together, you need sensual tension in your book.
You also need sensual tension in your book because it's one of the things that creates conflict. If you're writing straight contemporary romance in particular, your sensual tension, and this is whether or not you write explicit, even if you write sweet, you should have sensual tension in your books.
Closed door.
Can be closed door.
Absolutely.
It can be there can never be any consummation in your book whatsoever, but you still can have sensual tension. So this is relevant for everyone. But it is a major source of the romantic plot of your book, is the push and pull between your characters, whether it's a couple or a triad or whatever it is. This is part of the conflict that drives a book in the romance genre, for sure.
And even as we start to hedge into our very first topic, I'm going to date myself a little. Who here watched Moonlighting? Or nowadays Castle, which is sadly over, and I shall cry about that. Those are both great examples of our very first topic.
Yes.
You.
So we have, the way we're going to do this is we have our 7 steps to sensual tension, the things that we think help build it. And Christi and I have prepared some very, very short excerpts from some of our books to illustrate the points that we're talking about. And so the first of our steps is delayed gratification, also known as UST, unresolved sexual tension, aka cock blocking, right? That these are the elements that draw out the sensual tension and the chemistry between the characters, such that you have to wait for that first touch, that first kiss, that first going beyond a kiss, and then ultimately having sex. You want your reader yearning for it and longing for it as much as the characters themselves start to yearn for it and long for it. This is one of the things that creates page-turning romance, is the reader's desire to finally see them do it, or whatever level of do it your book is going to have. And so delayed gratification draws the conflict in your romantic storyline, and also creates a page-turning urgency to a book. And that's what you want. You don't want your readers to be able to put down your book at the end of a chapter because you've promised that maybe something's about to happen and they want to see it actually finally come to fruition.
You want the anticipation, like waiting for Christmas, and a good kiss, that is one hell of a present to unwrap, or anything that comes after that kiss.
And these near misses can come in all sorts of ways. This is, you're being mean to your characters here because they want that kiss, and then the phone rings, or somebody comes up to the door, or a building explodes, or the bad guy starts shooting bullets, or whatever it is that's going to keep the gratification from actually happening. And so the short reading that I prepared for this one, I'm actually going to draw from an older book, my second book. It's called Hearts in Darkness. It's about two strangers who get trapped in a pitch black elevator. It is my second best-selling book of all, even though it was one of my earliest, and it was originally with a small press, and now I've gotten my rights back, so it's self-published. But this is one of the books that people seem to most know me for. So just the smidge of backstory to this little snippet is that my characters are trapped in a pitch black elevator, and my hero is very severely claustrophobic. And so they've been playing 20 questions because she's been trying to distract him from his fear. And they've been locked in the elevator for a couple of hours at this point. And the sensual tension has ratcheted up between them despite the darkness. And so they've described each other a little bit, and they're curious about each other because they didn't see each other very well before the lights went out. And this is an example of delayed gratification. They're kissing, as one does with a stranger in an elevator. He pulled himself closer and slid his knee between her legs, keeping her from twisting her back the way she'd been. Not that she'd really noticed. Caden sucked the small diamond stud piercing her earlobe into his mouth as his right hand ghosted over her body and settled on her hip. Oh God, Caden. His cheek drew into a smirk where it pressed against her own, but she didn't mind him smirking when he licked and kissed and sucked at her neck the way he was doing. She tilted her head to the side to open to him and ran her hands back up to offering encouraging caresses to his neck and head. That was when she felt it, the fingers on her left hand clearly tracing what could only be a scar on the side of his head. She hesitated for less than a second, but he apparently sensed it because he pulled back just a little. I'll tell you all about it, he whispered, I promise. She inhaled a breath to respond when the elevator jolted and light exploded in the small space. McKenna yelped and clenched her eyes shut. Caden grunted and buried his face in the crook of her neck. After hours of staring into the blackness, the light was painful and blinding. McKenna was frustrated with the timing of the lights, relieved that they were on at the same time, but fearful about what would happen to her and Caden now that they were. So the light is the enemy in what seems like it should be the savior of this particular moment. And you can throw all kinds of things at your characters to cut off what it is that they want and get that delayed gratification.
Before most of you got here, I was telling a story about a sex scene I have in a book about to come out where they're in the ocean. And they're both ready to do it, but this is 2017 and we're responsible adults and nobody takes condom in the ocean. So, boom, cock blocked. And that was for a good reason. I mean, not just like a traffic siren going by or something like that. The thing we want to make clear, though, is you don't have to use all of these 7 steps all the time in your book. So it is okay to have a hot hookup in chapter 1 and not go, Christi and Laura said it has to have delayed gratification. We like the hot stranger sex in chapter 1. Go for it if that's your thing. But be sure to incorporate some other things and say they have a hot hookup in chapter 1. Then maybe they learn each other's names, discover the fact that they're enemies or shouldn't be together because he's the boss, and then you've got 200 pages of delayed gratification after that before they do it again. So there's always a way to work it in and amp up the anticipation.
It's the way these elements work together that really build compelling sensual tension. All right, and you've got our next step.
Second step. The dance. This one also has a subtitle known as Flirting and Internal Monologue. Building sexual tension involves a process of escalation and how the characters look at one another, how they talk to one another, touch one another, move around each other. And we're going to go with a super simple example. If a strange man walks into a store, steps around the counter and kisses the woman, that's not all that sexy. But if he walks into the store and he trades little flirty glances with the female clerk across the room, asks for her help picking it out, their fingers touch as they both reach for the lacy bra at the same time, she notices how good he smells, he notices how blue her eyes are, she asks if this is a gift for a girlfriend, I hope not, and he says it's not, and he's just noticed her before and needed an excuse, and then he kisses her. Which way is hotter? Thank you, guys. Sexual tension is built by the dance as much, if not more so, than the act itself. Yeah. And this is the same thing as anticipation. A lot of these layers come together because you just want to make it harder. We talk all the time about how we torture our characters. Well, you can torture them with want and longing too. That's all good, and you have to amp that up. But it doesn't have to be strictly sexual. Flirting, who's done it? We all like it, right? It's fun. Flirting is how you test someone's attraction to you and see if you can make them want you more. So it's super important. And I have a tiny example in which everyone is fully clothed. They're just driving down the street in a car on the way to a date, which doesn't sound that exciting, right? Way to put down my own writing. But it is, because here is what happens in the car. And these are friends who don't really think they should become lovers, because that's bad. What's the name of my book? Friends to Lovers. God, it had been ages since she'd been in a stick shift car. Watching his big hands caress the padded knob made her press her legs together in anticipation. You laughed because I said knob.
Yeah.
In print, it isn't quite as funny. Far safer to look out the window. Most homes still had candles in the window left over from the holidays. A few bare-limbed trees sported strings of white lights. Then I guess we're really doing this if you're finally letting me in your famous bootymobile. He sighed as if insulted. She has a name. This is Moll Davis. Daphne bit back a giggle. He named his car. Did he name other, more intimate things? Seriously, wasn't she one of the most famous mistresses in history? Maybe not in all of history. Certainly in England's history, good old King Charles II warmed her sheets for years. Beneath her flashy exterior, that woman not so secretly held all the power in the land. Just like my baby here. These people are flirting over European history from the 1600s. Come on. A bolt of desire shot through her as he stroked the steering wheel with both hands. God, would he touch her like that? And was she actually jealous of a car? I'm beginning to feel like I should get out and leave the two of you alone. He whisked his head sideways to smile at her. Quick and fast like a flashbulb going off, it blinded her with its brightness. She's game for a threesome. Gibb excelled at sexual repartee. A few times she'd even been his wingman and watched him toss it out with the ease of a fly fisherman casting in a deep river. Having it wholly focused on her, though, took her breath away. But Daphne reminded herself that tonight was her one shot. She needed to go for it, commit 110% to the idea that she actually belonged next to the handsomest man in the city. Maybe I want you all to myself, she purred. Once more, Gibb turned to look at her. This time he flat out stared, mouth slightly open, lips curling up. Then he swore and jerked the car to the right. He'd almost missed making the turn onto Michigan Avenue. You're right. We really are doing this. Daphne Level, welcome to your date. It is on. So, I mean, they're talking about his car and ancient European history. But they're flirting, and that escalates the sensual tension.
All right. The next step that you can incorporate into your books to escalate sensual tension is to engage the senses, right? What you want to create is an immersive experience that readers can imagine. And the more they can imagine about these sensual or sexual moments, the more they're in the story, the more that they feel they are experiencing it firsthand, and that more that can up the tension, both for the reader and the characters. The more you can engage the senses, the more not only do you make it an immersive experience for the reader, but also you can create associations for the character in all kinds of ways that you can use to echo back to that moment, and a smell or a sound or a song or an article of clothing or what have you, all can sort of set off the memories of that moment for you, but only if they were there in the first place. So you want to sort of engage those senses.
Let's go back for 2 seconds to kindergarten because it's been a while and sometimes you have to think about it. 5 senses: touch, taste, smell,
Yes.
sight, hearing. It is super easy to rely on maybe 2 or 3 out of the 5 of those. Push yourself. Push yourself to make sure you engage all 5.
Yeah, and the benefit here is that when you're writing a romantic conflict and a romantic pairing, you want the reader to understand all the reasons why this person is attractive to your character. So it's not just what they look like, but maybe it's how they smell, or maybe he's a really good singer and it's how he sounds, or maybe he's a terrible singer and that's hilarious to the heroine and she loves that, it's endearing to her. So engaging all the senses and giving all those physical reasons why someone is appealing or attracting just helps to cement the believability and the authenticity of the attraction and the chemistry between your characters. I really got to play a lot with senses in Hearts in Darkness because the first 60% of the book is set entirely in the dark. So the thing that we all go to first of description, sight, was not something I really had much of. Like, he sees a glimpse of her red hair and she sees a glimpse of a tattoo on his hand when he holds the door open for her, but the door's closed and then the lights are out almost immediately. So they don't really get much of a look at each other, which meant that I had to do all kinds of other things. So Caden he's got piercings, he's got a scar, he's got a buzz cut, he's a really rough looking guy. She can't see any of that except she knows he's got a tattoo. And so part of what they end up doing is physically exploring each other once they start having this connection. I'm going to read a real short scene from Ride Rough, my new one, that engages some senses. The heroine's trying to cheer the hero up after some bad things have happened. She's woken up in the middle of the night to find him gone, and he's sitting out at the lake behind his house, and she is trying to lure him into skinny dipping with her.
Wait, you didn't worry about the condom in the skinny dipping, did you?
They have sex on the beach afterwards, not in the water.
See?
But I
We have
don't
to think
worry.
about those
By
things.
then they've had sex a couple of times, so this is about the senses. Backward and backwards she walked until her feet hit the cool water's edge. Come on, Maverick, she's trying to urge him on. He tilted his head and his gaze lost some of the blankness from moments before. Alexa kept going. The water hit her knees, her thighs, her waist. The soft bottom was cold against her feet, but she kept going until she turned her back on him and gently dove toward the streak of moonlight stretching out across the dark, glimmering surface. The temperature was a shock to Alexa's sleep-warm skin, but it didn't take her long to adjust. And then it was like swimming through silk, soft and slick and tantalizing. The bottom was a little rocky in some places and muddy in others, so Alexa swam out until she could just barely touch, and then she floated. Small splashes sounded out from the water's edge. She smiled up at the star-scattered sky, her heart exploding at the fact that Maverick was getting in, that he'd let her offer a distraction from everything weighing on his mind. Finally, she turned to find him thigh-deep, breathtaking in his nakedness, and heading her way. He dove, giving her a flash of the ink on his back before submerging for a long moment. She scanned the surface, waiting for him to reemerge. Something grabbed her leg. Alexa screamed and flailed. Maverick came up wearing a smug smirk, his arm around her waist, his hair appearing dark from the water. She smacked his shoulder, laughing despite herself. "You scared me." "Sorry, baby," he said, his tone clearly not even a little sorry. Even though he said it playfully, the term of endearment unleashed butterflies through her belly. Until this week, she hadn't heard it in years, and it was both familiar and achingly new after so long. "No, you're not. You suck." Is that an invitation? So they start kissing, and then she describes the kiss. Maverick kissed her on a groan, his mouth tasting like mint and the earthy cleanness of the water, and something that was all him. And so,
Fifth sense, all 5 were in there.
If you're going to kiss in the water, if you're going to have lake water on your face, you're probably going to taste that. So it's an immersive thing to describe the sensation of swimming in the lake at night. And there's a little bit of that that's kind of scary, like you don't know exactly what might be touching you and you don't know what you're stepping on, but it's also super sensual. Like the feeling of water against your skin is an amazing sensual feeling. And so that's how you engage all the senses to really sort of ratchet up the experience of what's happening between them and to immerse the reader in it.
Now here's another caveat for you to make your life easier, and we don't want you walking out of this panel stressed. You don't have to put it all in when you're getting the words on the page. Get the words on the page, if that works better for you. Get the bodies touching where they're supposed to be and interlocking where they're supposed to be interlocking. But be sure, before you even hand it off to your first pass reader, that you go back and check and make sure that perhaps they are touching and tasting and smelling and hearing and all of that. You can layer it in later.
Yeah, deep point of view is defined as having 3 elements in every scene. Deep point of view is the physical choreography of the scene and the physical reactions, heartbeat, pulse, whatever. The intellectual reactions and internal monologue, what's going on in their head in a scene, and the emotional reactions and responses. So it's not just what they're thinking about it, but what they're feeling about it. And then, of course, dialogue, which is the outward expression often of some combination of that. So deep point of view is when you have those layers. Think of it as a layer cake. You don't have to hit all the layers on your draft. But if you become aware that you want, ideally, to have every scene be characterized by that layering system to get the point of view deeper and more immersive, that can be one of your revising habits, is to go back through and look for where can I deepen the point of view here by adding more physical reaction, more internal monologue, more emotional reaction, or punchy dialogue that might illustrate what's going on even more.
And if you get rid of all the fun extra, I have waterfall sex, she has lake sex. If you go back to straight missionary in a bed, 2 people, you still have the lemon scent coming off the fresh sheets, either the scratch of the wool blanket or the silken glide of the sheets, the way the moonlight's coming in through the curtains, maybe the smell of the candle in the corner. You still have all of things, even if you take it back to the basics.
I'm a big fan of them being so urgent to get into each other that they don't get fully undressed. And one of the sexiest little things to describe for me is the feel of his jeans around his thighs touching her when they're having sex. And it's just a little tiny thing, but to me, that's such a sexy detail. And
Not
it's exactly,
the zipper.
and
That
it doesn't have
hurts.
to be the craziest, sex scene ever to have that kind of a detail in it.
The next one is internal debate. This helps you as a writer because it also layers/builds conflict. When we talk about a romance, what does it have to have? It has to have a conflict, or else they get together on page 1, chapter 1, and there's no story. So no matter what genre you write, if it's historical, they're from feuding clans. If it's paranormal, he's a vampire and would kind of want to make her a snack. If it's contemporary, you have to work super hard to find a conflict, but it's there somewhere. Tropes, you guys all know what those are? Toss out 3 tropes. Yell them out.
Friends to lovers, forced proximity,
Secret baby. All of those things you just named lead to internal debate. It's the characters themselves giving in to what they want and then pulling back. Maybe their body wants the hot person in front of them, and their head, or their heart, in the case of Friends to Lovers, realizes that would be no good whatsoever. Maybe they're attracted to someone they know they can't or shouldn't have, like a vampire and a human. This 2 steps forward, 1 step back internal debate builds sexual tension. And the way to dumb this one down is figuring out if they should. I like to say that on this one, because you've got the whole book, this does not occur in one spot only. It's super important to have both sides have it. To have a well fleshed out romance, you want internal debate and conflict in both points of view, both the hero and heroine. So don't get lazy and do just the one. You will build the tension. You will escalate everything from a simmer to a boil if you make sure to go back and put it in both points of view.
And they don't have to be happening at exactly the same time. That is, the hero can get to the point of thinking, you know what, I actually want this person after all, before the heroine, or vice versa. So they don't have to be at exactly sort of the equal progression through the book. In fact, you can sometimes build tension by having one decide sooner than the other, I want this, and then the other person's like, I don't. And then that creates conflict and tension that helps to drive the romantic plot. So it doesn't have to be equal, but they both should have, a storyline on the sensual tension part of this that is their own.
And just knowing it, the reader knows he's a vampire, knows that she's a snack. That is not enough, because you want to pull the readers into your character's head, which is why you have to do the internal debate. You can also have dialogue about it. You can also have, no, I'm your best friend, this would be dumb, and then he kisses her because he doesn't want to have the fight about it. But you've got to pull it into that deep POV and be sure you have the internal conflict. And my tiny snippet is from Back to Us, which is a second chance romance. So there's a lot of internal debate because they did it once, ended up horribly, and now they're friends. So not only do they not want to revisit what went horribly wrong the first time, they don't want to spoil the friendship they've got now. Double layered for the win. So he says, I want you. There went his voice, dropping again into a growl that reverberated through her skin straight to her nerve endings. I've never stopped wanting you. I can't get you out of my mind. So this month of dating you're proposing is like getting the flu vaccine? With all this extra exposure to me, you think your attraction will go away? Piper knew she sounded flippant, but the words flew out in a defensive rush before she could stop them, because Ward hadn't just given a nod to the scab around her heart. No, with this offer, he'd stitched up the jagged edges of every slash he'd caused, bandaged them, and essentially kissed it to make it all better. Could he, though, make it all better? Did he even deserve the chance to try? Ward came around and crouched in front of her, hands hanging loosely off his massive thighs. Just the opposite. I'm hoping that your attraction to me will come back. It was on the tip of her tongue to admit that it had never left. Not when she was crying buckets of tears every night, not when she ripped up the notes he'd written her, not when she made Ella and Piper go out in the middle of the night and spray paint over the P+W he'd put on a rock at the edge of the lake. Piper felt like she was poised on one end of a teeter-totter. Right now, everything could change. Everything had to change. Ward's offer was out there now, flaring bright in her consciousness. She couldn't ignore what he'd said, couldn't forget it, but was she ready to fall again? Either head over heels or out of love with him forever? Either way, it would still be a fall. So she's not going to say that to him.
Last line. That last line is awesome.
She's not going to say that to him, because talk about making yourself vulnerable. What she in fact says is, I can't decide right now, you have to give me time. But you have to go through all of that in her head, because what does it do? It ramps up the emotional tension, leading into one of our next points. It ramps up the emotional tension and makes it matter. This isn't just sex. It's going to matter tremendously to these characters if they come back together again. And that, again, escalates the tension.
And I think that the thing to be careful with the internal debate is to not fall into your characters' heads for 5 paragraphs in a row and so interrupt your dialogue that you don't remember what the person is responding to when the next bit of dialogue comes.
Which is why I actually put one line of dialogue from him in there in the middle of it all.
So be very strategic and careful and giving the just enough internal monologue when you need it, and sprinkling it in with the dialogue rather than a line of dialogue, 5 paragraphs of navel gazing in the character's head. You've all read this and you're like, okay, they're going on and on and on. I get it already. You don't know if this is a good idea. You want to be judicious in your use of the internal monologue so that it doesn't end up feeling like a giant info dump or a giant navel-gazing distraction from the dialogue. Because the thing that really drives pacing in a chapter is dialogue. If you've got dialogue, it probably is reading faster on the page. You probably have more white space on your page, which is a psychological mechanism that makes a reader think that the pacing of something is faster because there's less text on the page. This is actually a little trick that authors are using now that more and more ebooks are being purchased and read, is breaking up big paragraphs. Because have you ever been on your Kindle and you swipe to the next page and it's a block o text? And all of a sudden you're like, well, and you're skimming this giant paragraph. But if you see a bunch of punchy dialogue, it feels like it goes faster. It's just a psychological thing about all reading and writing habits. But just be careful about your use of internal monologue, that it doesn't turn into an info dump. Okay. So I think we might both have an example to illustrate this next point. Do we? Did you pick one for dialogue too?
Of course.
Okay, good. Good, because dialogue is my favorite. It's so fun to write dirty dialogue, even if it's not like all the way dirty, but just like full of innuendo. I think that that's some of the most fun I have as a writer, is writing the sexy dialogue. So,
and wait, you skipped over that really fast, because let's remember that it can be any heat level, whatever heat level you write.
Sure.
There will be sexy dialogue. So although we're kind of going to the hot way, if you are in a closed door sex book, if you are in a Kristen Hannah type book, although she now does sex, it's kind of a different turn. You still have it. Think back to historical romances, Regencies, when, a glimpse of ankle was suddenly, are you showing me your wantedness, lady whoever?
Well, you don't have to go as hot to be risque
right.
in a story like that.
So just know that there should be, think of it again as flirting, there should be sexy dialogue to some extent, the next level of flirting, no matter what heat level you rate.
So sexy dialogue is our next step of sensual tension.
Because words increase the sexual tension. If it's just touching, you're missing that whole other sense that we told you about. You have to hear stuff too.
Yeah. The thing about the dialogue is that this can be like lots of different levels. It can be, in the scene that I just read, him using a term of endearment for her that she hadn't heard him say in 5 years.
Huge.
Was really meaningful dialogue in terms of driving sensual tension for her. All the way through, sexy threats and promises to full out dirty talk.
And then what you get is also the internal monologue reaction to the sexy dialogue. Sure. And that's building the layers together again.
Yes. And if you like the really, really sexy stuff, I think the thing to just say is, lots of people say, well, what if you're not comfortable using this word or that word? Don't use words that you're not comfortable with, just because you think they're the words you ought to use. Because if they don't feel natural to you, that may come across in the reading of it as well. Do what feels authentic to you, and maybe more importantly, authentic to the characters themselves. I tend to write really, really hot and explicit, but I have a Friends to Lovers book called Her Forbidden Hero, which is about, it's a couple, the guy grew up protecting the girl when they were kids. And so they have a sweeter kind of a relationship. They're not going to talk the same way as two adults who come together and are super confident in themselves and have a different kind of a relationship. So my sexy talk in Her Forbidden Hero was way more toned down than my sexy talk in other kinds of books, because it was right for that couple and those characters. So my example for sexy dialogue is coming from Ride Rough Again. And this is her first night staying in his house after many, many years. She's just gotten away from a bad situation. They fell asleep on the couch together watching TV, like in the middle of the night before. And he is dreaming in the morning, and he starts sort of coming on to her because he's half asleep and thinking of something in the past, and this is what happens. He flies off the couch and he says, "Goddamn dream, I'm sorry, Alexa, I didn't mean to do that." You were dreaming of me?" she whispered. His gaze narrowed. "Don't ask a question you don't want the answer to." She swallowed and licked her lips. "What if I do want it? The answer," she added. Years of need and longing roared through Maverick like a drug he'd mainlined. His thoughts spilled out unfiltered. "Damn it, Alexa, you're laying there in my clothes in my house with your thighs spread after I've just woken up holding you. My skin smells like you, and I'm sporting an erection because of you. Don't fuck with me." The words came out harsher than he'd intended, but she couldn't play with him, not on this. Not when he cared so much, not when he wanted so much. Her mouth dropped open and her chest rose and fell a little quicker. "I'm not playing a game. I want to know." Planting his hands on his hips, Maverick studied her beautiful languid body, her pretty open face, her eyes honest and free of pretense. He felt pulled in a million directions, between wrong and right, between taking advantage and taking care, between giving in and opening himself up to a world of hurt. I was dreaming of you, of us, up at Swallow Falls. That night yes, he growled. Maverick, fuck. Whatever is about to come out of your mouth is not a good idea. Mav, I mean it, Al. Maverick, she nearly yelled. Listen to me. His gaze caught up to hers in time to see her sit up a little and take off her shirt. Well, his shirt. Then she laid back down again, her eyes on him, drinking him in, inviting him in. What if I do want it, she whispered. So that's my sexy talk from Ride Round. How about you?
So I had one that's strictly sexy dialogue, but, and it's really my favorite, but I'm going to skip it because I want to do one that's a combination of sexy dialogue and something emotional and romantic to show you of working them together, but Reed wanting it all because it's super hot and they have sex outside at the National Arboretum.
As one does.
We live in that town. I don't think you should maybe say that to the camera.
National Arboretum.
You can't touch me, he ordered. What fun is that? She heard him open a drawer, drop his shoes to the floor. Then, joy, the noisy unzip of his pants. So she just heard something and saw something, by the way. Too dark for her to see much, but a tall shape. Oh, how she wanted to see his body, to not have to peek out of the corner of her eye, but to fully stare her fill. Look, just because I can barely breathe with how bloody bad I want to fuck you doesn't mean I will. He'd practically snarled, then immediately shoved her jeans to her ankles. Obeying his signal, she lifted each foot to allow him to strip her. Throwing mixed signals here, Gib. This is our first time, not a frenzied bar hookup. This is us. Finally. Daphne jumped as he knelt, skimming the outside of her thighs. I want to do it right. I want to take care with you. I want to take care of you. So you've got to stop driving me crazy with your hands and let me. So see, that got romantic. That made your heart flutter a little. Let you, she trailed off. Despite his plea, she couldn't resist tangling her fingers in his hair. Let me touch you. Another skim, this time down her calf. Kiss you. A kiss to the back of her kneecap that skittered licks of pleasure up her spine. Lick you. His tongue swiped a circle around her belly button. This time her knees did buckle a little against the strong wall of his shoulders. Show you how I hunger to be inside you. Fill you. One hand cupped her through her panties, pushed them to the floor. She tried to remember to breathe. His dark promises tangled her into a sticky web of lust. If you insist, I do. So there he combined the two so that there was engaging the senses there was slow-mo, which we haven't even come to there, and there was the sexy dialogue to string out the undressing and to show how much he truly cares for her, that because even though they're friends, this is going to be more meaningful than one night with the biggest man whore in Chicago, which is what he happens to be, by the way. So that is how you can use sexy dialogue. Banter. Sex does not have to be serious. I think Laura had some in there too. Go ahead and make them laugh because you do that in real life. You banter when you're having sex. It can be fun. It doesn't all have to be serious.
Absolutely. So our next step after dialogue is slow motion, slow-mo. And Christy's going to talk more about that one.
So giving readers every step, every detail in the midst of a tension-filled moment makes it that much more intense, and it builds the sensual and sexual tension. And I'm going to go old school here and say, and they're almost off the air, so I got to stop giving this workshop soon. Who used to watch soap operas? Thank goodness. In soap operas, they you can tell they're about to kiss, or he says, "I'm going to kiss you now, Tiffany." And then the camera goes to his face, goes to a close-up of her face, goes to his face again, and it's completely slowed down. And they're basically standing there this far apart from each other, frozen for 5 minutes, and then it goes to commercial.
One of my favorite examples of this from a movie, if you've seen the Twilight movies, in the very first one, Edward's in her room, and it's when they kiss for the very first time. I swear it takes 2 minutes for Edward to lean down to kiss Bella because I guess he's afraid he's going to eat her. And it's really, I think
Eat
it's
her?
Eat her, not that eat her, but that eat her, because it's not that kind of a movie, as it turns out. So, but I think it's actually super well done for ratcheting up the sensual tension in that moment, because he leans in so slowly, and you know from his characterization that he's struggling against all kinds of vampire urges. And then they ruin it a little bit by the crappy special effects when he flails back across the room after he kisses her because he can. But it's like really intense in that moment. If you haven't seen Twilight, it's a fantastic example of slow motion really ratcheting up sensual tension.
An easy way to think about it is freezing the moment, like the bad soap opera, but way better because you're going to write it better, especially with firsts. You slow down and freeze as they come to their first kiss, as they come to his hand grazing something in this area for the first time. And what makes it different? Describe it. If you think back to your first kiss, somebody brave, I'm not going to call on all of you because I freaked you out when you walked in the room. Somebody brave, raise your hand and tell me about your first kiss with your significant other. Excellent. Front row. I like that.
Well, it was at the end of our second or third date, and he'd made me dinner, and I was getting ready to leave, and I was wearing this leather jacket, and he just took a hold of my lapels and yanked me forward for a kiss.
That's a hot kiss.
That is a hot kiss. Well done.
So if we were writing that, you might do the fast, surprising, jolting thing of pulling in, but then once you're in, you can slow down the writing. What do the bodies feel like pressed together? What does she feel of his body? How does the leather jacket now feel that he's pulling it?
And the point of this is that's dialing in the senses, which is the engaging the senses point that we made earlier. So it's all about the internal monologue, which can also be the internal debate if this is or not a good idea. And it's dialing and engaging the senses. Yeah. So you're seeing how all of these things start to work together. Yes?
And you can use the fast and the slow to really sort of jerk the reader's, equilibrium around a little bit in the scene and build up that tension. Because as you're leaning in, like you might notice eye color for the first time, or that there's flecks of another color in somebody's hazel eyes, or you might notice a little mole on the side. Like you might notice things the closer you get, your perspective changes.
And you might also have that emotion, whether it's the first kiss or you're in bed for the first time. Everything slows down as you think about, oh my God, it's this man I'm falling in love with, and I think we're going to have sex now. That's going to change everything. Holy moly. I can't believe I just said holy moly on videotape. Scratch that. But think about a high school first kiss when it's like, boom, peck, you're both embarrassed, you turn away. You want to do the opposite of that. You want to make sure in your mind the one actual 30 seconds of coming together and kissing gets stretched out to a page. Now that's just an example. A page might be too long for you, or it might be 2 pages. But you want to slow things down incredibly so. And I have an example for you from this hot-looking guy, the biggest man whore in DC. Can you tell I have a theme in my writing? Mm-hmm. But this is slow motion of a kiss. Knox grabbed her by the arms, pulled her in fast and tight, and kissed her. 1 second, Madison was seeing red, frustrated at Knox's obstinacy and refusal to even consider her points. The next, Madison was seeing a whole different kind of red. The red of velvet wallpaper in bordellos, of red satin sheets, of the pulsing color that painted the backs of your eyelids when your heart pumped too hard. The red of passion. Because she didn't care that they'd been in the middle of an argument. This thing happened when Knox touched her. Suddenly nothing else mattered. So when he grabbed her arms and took her mouth, that was it. Their fight didn't matter. The wind lifting the back of her skirt didn't matter. Madison had devoted her life to books, knew the sweeping tales of passion from the symbolically sexy Psalm 45 in the Bible through Shakespeare and the Bronte sisters to D.H. Lawrence and the bodice rippers of the 70s. She's a librarian, I'm not just ranting. Madison respected those tales as art. She also acknowledged them as vastly overblown. Sex was fun, satisfying. It couldn't possibly reach the heights portrayed in literature, though. Or so she'd thought until being kissed by Knox Davies. The man was a master, his lips firm, his tongue demanding as it swept inside on her first surprised gasp, the gasp that turned into a moan, because he was doing these stroking motions with his tongue on top of hers that literally made her panties wet. He smelled of some undoubtedly expensive cologne that made her think of moss and woods after a summer rain. No, it made her think about rolling around on damp moss with Knox naked on top of her. So who can name which of these 7 steps to sensual tension were used in my slow-mo example? Because that was not the only thing I did. Anyone? You have a cheat sheet to look at?
Definitely engaging the senses.
Yeah.
Yay!
Yep,
Ding,
definitely
ding, 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 ding.
Internal debate.
Yay! Anything else? It was emotion. Starting to head that way. So I layered it all together, but he kisses her in the very first sentence, and then she doesn't talk about his kiss again for another 3 short paragraphs. That slowed down the entire moment. They were still in the first 5 seconds of him kissing her, but all the thoughts in her head dragged it out like that.
And that really illustrates, that particular snippet really illustrates, we're tearing these steps apart to make them, digestible as writing advice. But in the reality of writing, these things all work together and are interwoven in any particular scene.
All my examples, like this one, says engaging senses and slow-mo, because I couldn't pick just one because it illustrated both of them at the same time. You've got to layer them.
Yes. And our last step of sensual tension, and then we'll take questions, is making sure that your sex is imbued with emotion.
Because this is not a porn movie, it is a romance.
Right.
I think. I hope yours is a romance.
Sex for sex's sake does nothing to drive either plot or characterization. And the point of every sex scene isn't just sexual titillation. I mean, great if it has that reader reaction, that's fine. That's not a bad goal to be a part of what you're doing. But every sex scene should inherently be about driving either plot or characterization. The romantic plot, something in the character, maybe you have a character who never believed that they were worthy of love, and so they're refusing to believe that there's any emotion going on, and they're ignoring like hell what's actually going on emotionally for them. That's out of their characterization. But if they have sex another time later in the book and they realize for the first time, wow, I feel something, I mean, maybe I'm not even comfortable feeling something, but I'm going to acknowledge it. That is a character development happening between those sex scenes that the sex itself is causing. So the sex becomes fundamental to the change of character and the change of romantic plot. It's not just there for sheer titillation purposes.
And because you write erotica, speak to that as well.
Yeah, so in erotic romance, the sex is fundamental to the character's journey. So the sex is what drives characterization. They are involved in these particular kinks or erotic pursuits because of who they are as characters. It's what they fundamentally need to experience satisfaction or connection. And then, their journey with the other person is fueled by the sexual experiences that they share, or the kink that they both need, or the lifestyle, if they're full into a BDSM relationship, the lifestyle that they live. So for erotic romance, it becomes even more important, but I think it's important across the board for your sex scenes to play plot and characterization purposes. And if there is no plot, if your characters do not change because of the sex scene in some way, then your
think
sex
about
scene
changing. It doesn't have to be immediate.
Right. If it's not forcing your characters to think about where they are vis-a-vis the other person, then it probably is not doing the duty in the plot that it needs to be doing. And then you could almost decide whether or not you need it, or you can make it work in terms of plot and characterization.
There has to be an emotional risk and reward.
Yes. So I'm going to read a small snippet from Ride Hard, which is the first book in my Raven Riders series. The characters have been together for a while in the book at this point. This is what happens. "I'm laying you out this time," he said, pushing her back onto the dark gray covers. He helped her scoot up the bed until his body hovered over hers. "Nice and slow," he said, staring into her eyes as he rolled on a condom, settled his weight on top of her, and pushed his cock inside her. "Nice and fucking deep." As he penetrated her inch by hot inch, he could have come from the expression on her face alone. Rapt, almost anguished, and with something that looked a whole hell of a lot like affection in her beautiful eyes. Forehead to forehead, his fingers knotted in her hair while hers dug into his shoulders like he was the anchor in her storm. Fuck, he wanted to be that too, like he hadn't wanted anything in a long time, maybe ever. His hips snapped against hers, driving himself hard and deep on a series of demanding, punctuated thrusts. She gasped and moaned his name on each stroke, her eyes falling closed and her mouth falling open so that they breathed each other's air. "Look at me," he said, sucking her bottom lip into his mouth. "Look at me while I take you." "Yes," she whispered. "You make me feel, oh God, you make me feel better than I felt in my whole life." Which made him realize he felt the same way. It was, without question, the first time that fucking became laden with emotion for him. Despite all his lays, fucking had always been about the physical release and maybe an hour or two of companionship too. Not about emotion, never about emotion. Maybe that wasn't surprising, given the way he'd lost his virginity a million years ago, but a part of him had figured his wiring had just gotten crossed somewhere along the way. And he was fine with that, more than, actually, because emotions were nothing if not messy. Losing his mother and brother had taught him that. So, the hero in this book, has never in his life felt emotion with sex before. And this moment is the first time he's actually feeling some emotional response to having sex. And it's a hugely big moment for him as a character. It's changing him fundamentally, who he is, to realize that he can actually be having an emotional connection with a woman when he just figured that's not me. I don't need that. It's not important. I'm not really capable of it.